What's up, guys, and welcome to an all-new episode of Convos on the Pedicab. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, former city council candidate, OBGYN Dr. Jennifer Mushtaler. Before we get started, we just got to give a big shout-out to our sponsor, 10PATX, 10th Planet Austin. Get woke and improve your jiu-jitsu at the same time. There's a lot of civil unrest going on. Our police in Austin, they've been defunded. So that being said, come on down, learn some jiu-jitsu, learn a practical martial art that can help you out in all walks of life. Guys, self-defense is essential. Now, that being said, we got Dr. Jen coming on, and I'm really excited to have an actual doctor come on and talk to me while we're in the middle of a COVID crisis. So, Dr. Jen, tell us a little bit about yourself, and also tell us what made you run for office, and how can we improve our response to this virus?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm bummed we're out. I wish the runoff contestants good luck and good policy making in 2021. So I grew up in Houston. I'm a NASA baby, came up through the space program and did my undergraduate at the University of Texas in Austin. Studied engineering and co-opted my way through, and ultimately decided, as much as I love science and math, I'm kind of a people person.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, and so I needed to figure out where that was going to take me, and medicine was my calling. So I did my medical school training back in Dallas at Parkland Hospital, UT Southwestern, and residency over in Fort Worth, and ended up in women's health care.
I love it. And I got to say, you're probably one of the most charismatic candidates running who ran for city council, next to myself and, Casey
good.
Ramos,
You're
obviously.
good.
Yeah. But you're a good voice, I think.
We gave it a good shot, didn't we?
You did. You gave it a good shot. And I think that there's been a lot of misinfo regarding COVID, and it's been on both sides.
Yes,
and
it has.
Because there's a lot of misinformation from that's circulating as a result of this virus, and the effect that these shutdowns have been having on like small businesses and everyday working people, it's created a lot of distrust in government, and it's probably creating a backlash where people are doing a lot of really harmful things for public health. So I wanted you to talk about like what you think the city should have been doing and what we can be doing better as human beings to be more responsible.
I would like to see consistent public service messaging from the city. I do so much of it every day in the office with my patients, because you're right. People have to go to work. Kids have to get an education. We have to be able to put food on the table and function, but how do we do it safely at the same time? So what we know, and most people know at this point about COVID, is this is a virus. It's not a bacteria. You can't take an antibiotic for it. That doesn't cure viruses. They work differently. The virus is transmitted respiratory, and that's why you and I are outside and 6 feet apart. But we can still enjoy great company. So one of the things I'm doing right now is talking to a lot of my families about, what are you thinking for Thanksgiving? Who's getting together, and how are you going to do it to be safe? Because there are ways to do that. And I think what we need to do is we need to give people the information they need on how to be safe. So instead of saying, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, let's say, okay, if you need to do this, you're going to do this, this is the safest way.
Sure, and I understand that. And I think that message would probably resonate a lot better if people weren't having riots in the street during the middle of a pandemic. And even after Biden won the election, there were massive celebrations in these giant liberal cities where Democratic mayors were issuing a bunch of shutdown orders because of public health, but then they're out celebrating with a large group of people. And then when you see that, and then those same people are literally telling you to not, go spend time with your family during the holidays, it creates a backlash, and it's a justifiable backlash. So what's your take on all that?
There's a lot. This year has been a crazy year. We had a lot to talk about in our local election. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of unrest. the country has been very divided, and every single issue is being used as a wedge between people instead of a way to have dialogue and bring us together.
Yeah. Even mask wearing is dividing people. And it's not because people are arguing about, hey, I should wear a mask and I shouldn't wear a mask. It's because there's literally a barrier over your face preventing people from actually communicating. And when we already have enough problems communicating with each other as it is through digital media and whatnot, right? And now you're telling people they have to wear masks when they go outside. It's going to create even more isolation and more division.
You and I need to invent the emoji mask. So we can have like the emoji on our face, how we're really so. Well, my family and I and my patients, we've talked about it a lot because in a Western culture, the way we communicate, the way we're doing it now, you read a lot by the whole face. Certainly as a physician, when I'm with a patient, I'm reading a lot by their face, their mouth lines, their eyes, their nose, which way the corners of the mouth are turned. And when we have a mask on, we can't see that. We lose those visual cues, and we're not used to that. There are other parts of the world that are. There are other cultures that are.
But I don't want to get used to that. I don't want. No. I don't want to. Like, I like living in America. Like, I like how we communicate. It's not something I ever want to get used to.
I agree. I obviously I wear masks in surgery, and we do this for sterility and protection, and that's why we're doing it now. I don't want it to be forever either. I'm having to wear one all day at work, inside with my patients. My patients have to wear masks when they come in, and I don't want it to be forever. So. Come on, vaccine. We can talk about that.
We're going to talk about vaccine too. Yeah, but all right. So before we get to the vaccine, right? Like, I drive a pedicab in Austin, right? And my big concern is I just want to give rides to people. I finally found something, as midway, late 20s that this is the only job I've ever been good at, right? And I'm phenomenal at it. Like, I'm really good at this job. Like, I found
got a whole business.
Well, it's not my business, right? But I work for this company.
But it is a business. Congratulations.
Right. But I don't own a cab. Like, I literally lease one of these cabs. I really love what I do. I make a pretty good living. I talk to a ton of people. I experience multiple perspectives. I feel really good about myself. I feel really happy being part of, like, our vibrant nightlife. And I don't want this to be taken away from me at all under any set of circumstances, even if it's for a month or two. I don't want it to ever be taken away from me. So that's a concern I have, and that's why I'm like, so adamantly opposed to these shutdowns. And yeah, we got to be cautious, we got to be careful. But you look at the CDC data, 94% of the people that got seriously affected by this virus had extremely serious pre-existing conditions. So I feel
those are the easy pickoffs. So when we look at that data, the easy pickoffs are when there's an underlying health condition, an underlying problem, age, immunocompromised, those kinds of things. Just look at a herd of cattle or deer. I mean, those are the easy pickoffs. The ones that got confusing and that we still don't quite understand, remember, this is a brand new virus. We're not even a year into this, really, or just now coming up on a year, but not even a year in the United States, are why some people are having extreme autoimmune storm reactions to this at varying ages. And that we see in all age groups. That's a key piece that we don't quite understand. We're getting better at treating it, which is awesome, but it's still a piece we don't understand. And when there are lingering effects to young people, so if someone like you were to catch it and get ill, and let's say you're in the positive statistic, you have a mild infection, you're home a few days,
or
maybe
asymptomatic.
Asymptomatic, you feel great. We still know that a number of those people are getting underlying cardiac inflammation and damage and things that are going on, and we don't have the answers yet. We don't know. We don't know what that means long term.
Because I'm going to be honest, I probably already got this virus because I've done like no social distancing at all. Throughout. Oh wow!
We're going 10 feet, boys.
No, but like I've really done. I was doing jujitsu. I was working out. Like I was seeing my friends. Like I didn't really I tried my best to not let the stay-at-home stuff really change too much how I went about my day-to-day life because I'm a people person. I need human connection, and without that, I would have lost my mind and just fallen into like extremism, which a lot of people started falling into extremism because they were home all day. So like it's
still going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that we need that. We're social creatures. We need that contact. And even to be able to see family, but not to be able to go and give grandma a big hug or that kind of thing, even if you're going to have the distance.
But I'm still going to give my grandmother, like all my grandparents are dead right now, but like I don't care. I'm still gonna get, like, if my grandparents were alive, it's about what my grandmother wants to do. If my grandma still wants to have human contact with her grandchildren, you got to respect the wishes of the elderly. And if you also look at it this way too, right? Like, the majority of people who died from this virus were already in their 80s anyway, right? Like, if you're at that age and you're okay with whatever happens to you, it should be ultimately your choice as an old person as to what you want from your family. Like, if you're undertaking, like, you know what I mean? Like, if you're 85 years old, and you know the risks and you're willing to undertake those risks because you want to see your grandchildren, like, or your children, that's should be your choice too, Like, there should just be open communication.
Yeah, I think where it gets more difficult is when you have folks that are not in independent living situations, so the choice gets removed. So for example, my parents are doing great. They're all independent living. They can choose to isolate, quarantine, and how they're going to do their safety for their health. My great aunt lives in a senior center. And so while she can isolate in her room, anybody who's coming into work, any of the CNAs, any of the food prep folks, any of the janitorial, custodial services, buildings op people that manage the facility, now they're coming into contact with these people too. We're such an interconnected society in so many levels that it becomes very tricky. And this is the same problem we're having in the schools, right? We could say, well, the kids appear to be at very low risk for a symptomatic infection, very low risk for complication if they're healthy kids. But then what about custodial services, building ops, teachers, administrators, things like that?
Well,
so
they got to start giving hazard pay too. If you're no, seriously, like, if you're a school teacher and you have to, like,
at this point,
go work at a school right now for all this stuff, you got to get. They should be striking to get hazard pay, and they should also be trying to get hazard pay because if you have to wear a mask all day while you're teaching, I'd want hazard pay too for that.
I think more importantly, we've got to get the proper tools and supplies in the schools. So where does the money come from to make sure a teacher has a proper shield or the plexiglass, just the square footage? They talked about that during some of the shutdowns and the planning on how to open the schools. If we want to have good, safe distance, now you just have a problem of square footage. And where do you get that? And let's say, okay, we have empty office buildings. Let's use empty office buildings for schools. Now you have to have more busing to get the kids there to those schools. So
right, but
it got
even,
very complex
and the bus
very
and the busing too is also like a haven for spreading this virus because everyone's super close together on the bus and people sit next to each other on these buses. I mean, if you're worried about this virus, maybe you shouldn't be busing people.
Yeah, well, the districts had to do a lot of steps to consider how to do that. One of the things that ended up being in their favor was, given that people had the option to keep kids home and remote school, the school populations are, I think, anywhere from 30% of the kids are in class to at the most 50%. So that's dropping the capacities that they have to transport on the buses.
You know what you need to do, what you should be doing, right, to really minimize the spread, is you got to provide more access to micromobility for the kids. Because you know how many, like, Lime scooters and Bird scooters and, like, Razors and all these things are, like, all downtown, right? Like, why isn't the city working out contracts with these companies to just give the kids their own scooter and pay a subscription for the you know what I mean?
Like, and you should know this from running, right? In some ways, the geography, including the districts, are very gerrymandered. So you can have kids that are busing really what's beyond a pedestrian commute.
Yeah, but the scooters
10,
go
15 miles. To get to where they need to.
Sure, and that's a concern. But I think, and you're not going to solve. Look, I think the thing that people misconceive about government is that you expect it to solve all your problems, and all government really is supposed to do is it solves enough of these problems where it becomes semi-manageable for everyday people.
That was a big part of the campaign discussion was what's the role, right? When we started talking about the role of law enforcement and how do we do that, that comes down to a philosophical discussion is what's the role of government? And everybody has a different viewpoint, and that goes down party lines and things like that. But
what I'm saying though is that, if you're like an elementary school kids, because look, like these scooters and micro devices are pretty safe for kids for the most part. Kids ride them as toys and whatnot. Why aren't we like exploring situations where if the school's within like 4 or 5 miles from your house, right? Just take a scooter to go to school. You'll probably get there faster than by being on a bus anyway, and you don't have to worry about sitting next to a bunch of people and having this be a super spreader event, because being on a school bus with a bunch of kids could be a super spreader.
Yeah.
More
But
so than being in a
that's
classroom.
presuming 100% capacity on the buses.
Yeah, but you're still in an enclosed space, right?
Windows open, masks on.
Yeah, but
I'm still going to be a proponent. Masking is easy. We went through this in the 1980s. The 1980s, we were dealing with HIV/AIDS and learning how this virus spread, and it was deadly. It killed people. It was.
But
a
we
death
didn't have
sentence.
shutdowns because of AIDS.
Well, we had to figure out where it was coming from and how it was spread, and ultimately, a lot of that became that. What came in on that, in that understanding, was a safe sex campaign, and so, to me, like as I was running, and people were like, "Well, you're an OBGYN. Well, what do you know about communicable disease?"
Yeah, you and Ron Paul have the same job, and Ron Paul has a different philosophy on
I
this
know
virus.
about
So, yeah.
communicable disease. I treat it every day. but we know that barriers do provide a very easy, inexpensive way to decrease transmissions of viruses and bacteria. And if our goal is to allow people to get together and be able to move around and do things, until we have a safe vaccine and all of that available for the public at large, or an easy treatment, that kind of thing to prevent, severe complications, that's the easy thing that all of us can do.
Right.
None of us like it,
I
but it's
understand.
just temporary.
But we are making a lot of advancements in treatment.
Yes,
like
we are.
remdesivir is like already starting to get distributed widely.
Well, we have the new release on some of the stuff from Eli Lilly on the antibody treatments that are coming too, which is very exciting. But I'm very excited about the vaccine coming.
Are you?
I'm very optimistic.
So how do you think the vaccine should be distributed, and who should be required to take that vaccine, Jen?
Well, we live in a free society, so we don't force anybody to do anything.
Good. I'm glad we're on the same page because
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think education, understanding is important.
Important, yeah.
As far as where we're going to start, the medical societies, the ethical folks are laying out a plan that I think makes good sense. And the first thing is you've got to get your frontline healthcare workers vaccinated for two reasons. One, you need them well and on the job. And two, they can't be the next spreader that takes it to an uninfected part of the hospital or families. So they've got to get vaccinated.
All right.
And we need to start there.
Pause. So what if you've already gotten the virus and you already have antibodies? Because isn't the vaccine literally giving you antibodies for a virus?
It stimulates your body to produce antibodies. So it creates a false exposure, if you will. So your body says, oh, there's a virus, and then your body produces the antibodies. Some of the unanswered questions that we have right now is, if you've had the illness, how long do you have the antibodies? How much antibody needs to be present so that you still have immunity? And those same questions apply to the vaccine. What we know is that if we can get a number of people vaccinated at a good confluence of time so they all have immunity, then the virus can't propagate. Right now,
Sure.
the virus, it's shooting fish in a barrel because nobody's immune. The majority of people's immune systems do not have awareness of the virus and can't respond in a way to fend it off.
But you also produce T cells too when you get this virus or when you're exposed to people
Ultimately down the road,
who get
yeah.
the virus. So there could be a possibility that, look, this vaccine's not even going to be distributed until at least probably like around January or something. Because just because they
It's not far off.
right, but like just because Pfizer released this vaccine that has 90%. That looks like it's 90%. That looks like it's 90%.
And it was just the corporate statement, not the
yeah.
scientific review yet.
Yeah,
but it is looking very promising.
Okay, so just because of that, right, it doesn't mean that people are going to be starting to get vaccinated right off the bat. It's probably going to start getting distributed by January, February, March, right?
I think they're ready. I mean, I believe the government is ready and in place that as soon as production is available, all these steps.
But people aren't going to start getting it till January, February, March. And
might happen faster.
Okay, but let's say it doesn't. Let's say it doesn't happen faster, right?
Okay.
And this virus is already propagating.
So we've got to get through the holidays.
Right, maybe, but also you're going to have a lot more people are going to get antibodies and get exposed to this virus within that time frame. So in order to actually achieve some kind of basic herd immunity where it gets under control, you might not need to vaccinate as many people to do that. Does that make sense?
Sort of yes, but the idea of herd immunity kind of got turned around when we talk about herd immunity. That's actually a term that's used to describe effects of vaccinating versus viral exposure itself. And so when we talk about herd immunity, what we're saying is there's a certain threshold that needs to be reached so that the virus can't jump from next carrier to next carrier to next carrier. And we don't really have good data on, as a virus comes up through an unimmunized herd, what's the threshold?
Nobody
we
knows.
have that data on vaccines. So we don't know. Again, you're in uncharted waters. We don't know. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of speculations. Could it be 25%? Would that be enough? Could it be 50%? Would that be enough? Does it need to be 85 to 90%?
Because I think enough people are probably going to take that vaccine voluntarily, where
I'm
they're
ready.
going to. No, yeah. Like I think enough people. I'm not taking that, right? But I think
Okay,
enough.
so we're 50-50.
Right. But I think enough people will probably take that vaccine voluntarily, where you're probably going to. It'll probably just be a voluntary thing where it's not going to get forced on people. That's my.
I don't think you can.
I don't-
I don't think you can force
could-
it unless there's certain job functions. I mean, for my employment, right, it is. You have to have a medical reason why you wouldn't take the flu vaccine annually. If you're
I've
gonna
never
be in
taken a
certain
flu
areas.
shot, and I never
a
want.
lot of people
I
haven't.
don't want to take a flu shot. I don't trust it. But anyway, like
I
that's
think
not.
I'm taking you down in jiu-jitsu if you're not in a pain.
All right, no, but what Hey, but what I'm saying is though, like, look, I substitute teach like in like Hayes County and whatnot, right? I don't want to have to be forced to take a vaccine in order to like be a teacher, right? And for me giving rides, I don't want to have to be forced to get a vaccine
Right.
to have a chauffeur permit. Like I don't want that. That's like an infringement on my rights, you know. And I don't ever want that to be the case. But I do think that people should there should be a plan to widely distribute it to anybody who
Yes.
wants to take it.
And that's in place. So the government at the federal level has already been working on how they're going to distribute out the vaccine to different areas, and it also depends on we have a number of different vaccines that are showing good promise. So some of them require certain technological specifications to be able to be transported
Hey, I got one more
and
question.
kept, and then some of them that are coming down may not require as rigorous. So that's going to change how we're able to get this available widespread.
All right, Dr. Jen, I got one more question too.
Okay.
Because you're talking about how long do antibodies last, you know, if you get the virus, right? But then how long is the vaccine effective, and how many, like if this vaccine becomes a thing where it's the only way to control this virus, how many booster shots are you going to have to need to you know, not spread the virus, right? Because if I have to get if people have to get like 3 shots a year or even 1 shot a year or whatever, that's not something that people are going to want to consent to or be okay with. I would rather get COVID than have to deal with that.
But we know that even if you get COVID, your antibodies wane off. You potentially could get
Exactly.
it again.
Then so what's the difference? Then if there's no, then how is there any discernible difference between having had the virus and just getting the vaccine in terms of your immunity from a prolonged period of time?
Risk of morbid complications and death.
Okay.
The vaccine is not the virus. It's a copycat, but it's not the virus itself. So you're not actually going to get sick with the COVID illness from the vaccine. Anybody can get, you know, it's going to stimulate your immune system to create those antibodies. And when that happens, sometimes people can feel a little achy or get a little fever for a day. People tell you that all the time with the flu vaccine, right? Oh, I feel crummy. I had my shots today or whatever. That's your immune system creating that response, but you're not actually getting the illness. So there is a big difference there.
Sure, but if like for me, I'm super healthy. I take really good care of myself. If I make
You
a
know,
conscious
one of our first deaths in Austin was a super healthy basketball 24-year-old.
I did not know that. Were there any like other complications that the person had?
No.
I mean, there are outliers.
No.
Outliers exist, but if I choose that that's what I
exactly.
want,
And
if I choose that that's what I want to risk, I should still be allowed to make that choice
Sure,
conscientiously.
that's individual choice. That's fine, and I agree with that. I just think what a lot of people don't understand is that there's still so much we don't understand, and we have to allow for science to catch up with this virus. And we're doing it quickly, but there's still more to understand. There are still questions we don't have answered. Of the people who have suffered cardiac damage, is that going to resolve? Are they going to be fine and have perfectly normal cardiac functioning? Of the people who are suffering from some of these longer duration post-viral symptoms, is that going to resolve for them? Is that a lifelong issue? We don't
Yeah.
have those answers yet.
And nobody even knows the long-term effects of this. Like people, a lot of like
No.
apparently I heard something on Reuters that 1 in 5 people who get the virus may have some like mental complications afterwards.
All
Like
kinds of
nobody
things.
knows. Nobody
That's
knows
right.
anything. And if there is like a deadly virus going out there, yeah, you should be protecting people from this. But it's also the government's responsibility to be honest about how much of a threat this virus actually is to human life. Because then, if they're not honest about that, this is how conspiracy theories start spreading.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can say being in a hospital, working in a hospital, and seeing what's going on in real time, if people can see it in real time, it's awful. It's awful.
So have you had COVID patients in your hospital? Or because you
We have.
Do you get to talk to them? Because you don't work with COVID patients. You're
Not well. I don't. I'm as an OBGYN. I am typically not taking care of critically ill COVID patients that are in the ICU. We do have those patients, and we have wonderful ICU specialist teams that take care of those patients. For obstetrics, what we'll have is maybe a mildly symptomatic patient or an asymptomatic patient that may come in labor who needs care right then and there. And what we need to know at that moment is how do we protect so we don't have a super spreader on the unit infecting staff.
Because somebody could be COVID and have COVID and be pregnant, right? Like
Absolutely.
What happens to the baby if that's the case?
So what we have observed so far is that COVID does not seem to pass during pregnancy from the mother to her child. The child seems to be safe in the womb. And what we believe happens is that at birth, the contact with mom in the same room, or the respiratory contact like anything else, would be when the child catches it. There have been a couple of cases that have come up in the literature that make us question, do we understand it fully? But overwhelmingly, that's what we're seeing is if mom's positive, the baby's born negative and then converts. But the majority of babies, their immune systems they're doing well, especially if they're nursing because they get antibodies from mama's breast milk.
Okay. And even with mom having COVID, is that still okay?
Our moms are doing much better than we thought. Initially, because it was respiratory, and we know that certain respiratory situations can be high risk for pregnant women, we were very concerned about what COVID might do in pregnant women. As it turns out, a lot of pregnant women tend to be younger and healthier. And so the majority of pregnant women actually do very well with COVID. Their illnesses tend to be mild, their babies are unaffected, and they're doing well with it. We've seen some serious cases in our unit, and some of the data also suggests that there is a higher risk of preterm delivery and preterm birth if there's been a COVID illness. But there is some reassuring data that it's not the death sentence that we were worried it could be. It does not appear to be.
It doesn't
that
seem
way.
like it's as deadly. And one of the things that made me skeptical about things was when we started shutting down, I started reading articles in like The Hill and like The Times and all these major newspapers saying that like over 50,000 people in China already recovered from the virus. So I'm like, why are we shutting things down when people are recovering from this in droves? Like that's what made me seem very.
But you also saw the negatives, right? We have a horrible death rate right now in the Rio Grande Valley.
What is the
We've
death rate
seen
in the
that.
Rio Grande Valley?
Their positivity rates, their transmission rates are running up closer in the teens. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the exact death rate they've got right now, but they've had to release morgue trucks, and we're having to supplement healthcare workers down there to cover
Sure.
the overflow of hospitalizations.
Okay, but
so
here's
it's pretty serious.
All right, but here's another problem too. All right, here's another question. What's their hospital capacity like, and how are the hospitals in that area? Because you could have a big problem in that region because the hospitals just were never prepared to we're just never adequately staffed to begin with. And that could be like an outlier. Like Austin, even while we were like, Austin's never really had a problem with overflowing its hospitals.
We got lucky.
No, we didn't. It didn't happen because we have one of the fittest populations in the United States.
We have some of that. We have plenty of elements that's not, because and
people are responsible.
You know what you see, right? You get to work out with jitsu patients. I see patients for all manners of healthcare reasons, so I get to see a larger wath of that. The shelter-ins, the lockdowns, I do think that gave us a chance to stay ahead at that time.
Disagree. And
That's
I'll tell you why.
okay.
I'll tell you why I disagree with you. Because and I also noticed when you were on Brad Swale's podcast, you were talking about how you were upset about people going to the creeks and going to Barton Springs and being outside. And that's something I never really understood, especially since sunlight and exposure to water is actually probably good for your immune system, and it's probably something that we should be doing while all this stuff is going on.
Outside, yes. I'm encouraging people to do their exercise outside, and if they want to visit, do it safely outside. But during those times, it wasn't as simple as, two people from the same household spread out a picnic blanket 10 to 15 feet away from the other person. It was much more congested, much more crowded, too close a space, and not under the guidelines that most of us are adhering to now.
Hey, do you think the BLM protests had anything to do with spreading the virus?
I think anytime you have a mass gathering, I think there's risk.
There's risk, right?
I just, and again, we don't want to take away people's rights and their free speech rights and their rights to gather and that kind of thing.
No, and
I think in the setting of a pandemic, if you're asking me medically, anytime we put a lot of people together with a virus that can spread asymptomatically and we're in closer quarters, we take away some of the safety features, there's risk.
Okay. I just want to...
And that applies to both sides.
Both sides.
Both
100%.
parties.
100%,
Yes,
both sides, both parties. But that's the thing. There's no people weren't really transparent about that. You know what I mean? And I think that if there was a better transparency from our media and from some of our politicians, people would be more likely to actually take safety precautions. And I think that's where they're dropping the ball. And look, I think that a lot of these protests are so important. We need to move towards equality in a much better sense. But if you're not going to give honest information about how this can expedite the spread of a disease, it'll undermine the message of what this social movement is doing. So that's where they're dropping the ball.
I agree with you.
So that's my take on it. I was pedicabbing a lot of FEMA nurses in Austin. And while we were in Austin, right, they told me they haven't had to see a patient or do anything at all for the past month that they were there. Mm-hmm. They've been just going to brunch and going shopping, and they've been getting paid insane amounts of money. They've been put up in the JW. They've been in my cab. Half of them probably weren't even wearing masks when I was pedicabbing them. In my honest opinion, most of these nurses I was taking, they were more worried about Bill Gates than they were about COVID. So there's a lot of also disagreement amongst the scientific community about what this virus is and how we should be going about things. So have you encountered any doctors or professionals that are that have just been completely against the shutdowns and
yes.
the prolonged mask wearing and all that stuff? And how's that been? What's
I would say, in general, the majority of physicians take it very seriously. The majority of my nursing staff and nursing teams that have been working this take it very seriously. And I believe the data speaks to that. So when we look at what's going on right now in the general population, for example, in the state of Texas, and the state of Texas, that's going to be areas that are urban, rural, and have low risk, and that's going to be areas where we have high transmission rates. But overall, we're sitting, as of November, we're sitting at about 10 to 12% positivity rate.
In Austin, we're at 5. We're at 4.
We're lower.
We're at 4, and our hospital, we only have
Austin.
40 people on ventilators and 20 people in the ICU and 100 people in the hospitals. For this virus in a city of 1 million people, we're doing fine.
We're doing well.
We should, the way that we have been opening, I feel like we've been opening pretty responsibly, and we should probably open a little more, if you want my honest opinion.
I would say the opening more comes when the rates are tipping downward versus right now they're actually tipping upward again. And so my thought would be, okay, everybody, be a little more careful, take a step back, don't relax on it yet. Let's bring that. Let's turn that down again, and then we could look to open more.
It's not.
But
it's
we've done a pretty good job.
We're doing fine, and it's going to keep going up, probably through the winter. It's just a matter of it going up in a way that's not overwhelming. But it's going to go up. These viruses, generally speaking, always act up and become more severe in the winter.
People get close
and
together
even when we were at our peak, we dropped down substantially during the summer while we still stayed open, with the exception of bars. So I think that there is that is an encouraging piece of data to look at.
It is. So what I was going to tell you was that in the hospital, while the community positivity rates, say in Austin, are 5 to 6%, across Texas they're at 11%. Within the hospital systems, among healthcare workers that are taking care of patients, our positivity rates are less than 1% on the conversions.
Amazing. That is amazing.
And that's not everybody in hazmat. So when I'm on the unit, or when I'm with patients, I take universal precautions, but it's not a hazmat suit. When I'm with a laboring patient, if the COVID status is unknown, we're taking laboring precautions until we get the results back. And then if the patient is positive, then we have additional precautions we take for a COVID positive patient. But we've been able to keep our conversion down. And that's where I feel like when we talk about what is the role of government, it's to educate and give people the tools that they need to be safe.
All right, now we're going to pivot a little bit.
All right.
Do you think our government is doing that?
Local, state, federal, where are we?
Local, we're in Austin. We're in Austin. You ran for local office. We're going to talk about Mayor Adler, and we're going to talk about how Mayor Adler is kind of dropping the ball a little bit on this.
Not necessarily. I think when the virus first came out, and I think this is across the board, even medical, I think there was this sense of it's not going to be that bad. There was a lot of denial about what the virus would do and what its potential could be, and what we needed to do to get ready for it timely.
I thought that we were going to be safe just being in the United States, honestly. I didn't think it was. I thought this is a foreign thing. It was in China. It was going to mess up like how we were producing goods. We should be more manufacturing independent. That's really like the takeaway I was getting in the beginning of it.
Yeah, we're a very interconnected globe.
Yeah.
We are all interconnected with each other. So that wasn't going to last too long. When things started happening and they made the decisions to go to shelter in, at the same time that was happening, the hospital systems got ready. And so major hospital systems that function as businesses and compete with each other. So in Austin, we have HCA, we have Ascension, we have Baylor Scott and White, we have the UT system, and we have Austin Public Health. The private systems compete with each other for market share, for patients, for reputation under normal circumstances. And they don't tell each other what their business plans are or their game plans are. They don't share that data.
Yeah.
As we began to get ready for COVID, all of these systems came together at a very high level. So the regional heads came together and talked about and shared data that they don't normally share. What's our ventilator capacity? What's our ICU capacity? What's our staffing capacity? And that is unprecedented. They looked at that data and what they were going to be able to handle, and they shared that with the mayor and had those discussions. And so while we can talk about what was right, what was wrong in the beginning, what I do want to give credit for is I want to give credit to the academic circles, to our Austin Public Health Department, and to our private industry for all working together to create very quickly a plan on what we had for supplies and what our contingency plans were going to be if this happens or this happens or this happens. We got within a striking distance of having to have a field hospital. And so what they were watching was the daily number of hospital admissions and the ventilator capacities in these institutions. And we were right at threshold. And we could have gone either way. So yay public for doing the right thing. And we didn't need it, but that's why you had FEMA nurses here, because they were ready.
Yes, but all right. So Dr. Jen, here's the other thing too, right? Like our schools are closed. Why weren't we using some of these schools like Lake Travis or Westlake or some of these giant schools, right? Or these schools that have like 10,000 seat football stadiums? Why weren't we preparing those areas to be field hospitals in March or April? Or why weren't we preparing the convention center to do that?
They cited that. No, they looked at what they would need. No, in those areas, I think I would actually give them credit. I think they did a good job. They had plans in place for how to, if people were not able to quarantine and needed to because of their living situation, they had housing available to be able to provide quarantine, whether it would be a healthcare worker or a private citizen. They had a plan in place to open a field hospital outside of these institutions. That was all ready to go.
Hey, so we got to talk about your encounter with Mayor Adler. We talked about this over the phone. Okay, we got to hear this story. So you were out jogging, right?
And the mayor was too.
And the mayor was too.
So good for him.
So was he wearing a mask?
I will be honest, neither one of us were masked. But if you're outside and you're not within 10 feet of another person, you don't need the mask.
But Mayor Adler, but we're just trying to be clear. Mayor Adler was not wearing a mask.
Not at that time.
Not at that time,
but
right?
he was not with anybody else.
but they're not.
And he was not near anybody else.
That is all we need to know. Mayor Adler was not wearing a mask. Hey, but listen though, like just to be
semantics.
Just to be clear though, like that's another problem with how they're communicating this. Like when it comes to mask wearing, just tell people when you should wear
When
it
you need to,
and when you don't need to, and you're not doing that. And that's an example of you not fulfilling your responsibility as a public official to actually give proper health advice. When you're getting advice from all these doctors and medical experts, you got to do a better job at communicating this.
That's one of the things I would have liked to have seen. That's one of the things I would, and it can still happen. We're going to be dealing with this for a while. We're going to need good public service messaging on the vaccine, how to get it, things like that, who's eligible and stuff like that. And we didn't see a lot of that. One of the things that rubs me the wrong way is we saw a lot of messaging about Proposition A. There was $1 million spent in advertising for Proposition A. What would $1 million have done for helping people with COVID?
What would $1 million have done in terms of helping our small businesses and helping the people in our service industry that couldn't work as a result of that? Like that's the problem with that's just it's a huge problem.
How's the taxes looking for this business?
I don't know. I don't own the business, but I don't
bet
think
they're
that
thrilled.
Yeah, it's not going to be good with to do a tax hike in the middle of a pandemic when you're telling people that they can't operate
in the middle of a recession.
In the middle of a recession, it's almost like you're deliberately trying to destroy. It's almost like you're perpetuating a war on small business. Like that's literally what it feels like when you're doing stuff like that, and that's.
I was not for that at this time.
I mean, that's why there's a recall petition for Adler, and it's probably going to be successful this time. Or there's a much better chance of it being successful now than it was 2 years ago with the homeless stuff.
Even if it's not, what I'm hoping is that by your running for office, by my running for office, by people just speaking out, and even if the petition is not successful, I'm hoping that helps whoever is elected to understand this is where your voters are, this is where your constituents are. Things kind of went the wrong way. Let's get back on track with what people want from their government.
100%. And while you were running, how did your opinion of like Austin city politics start changing? And how did your opinion of the Democratic Party start changing? Because you're technically still a Democrat, even though you're pretty independent and you're very good at listening to both sides, which I think me and you have something very much in common about trying to connect with both people and be empathetic. So let's hear it, Dr. Jen. Don't be shy. Don't be shy, Dr. Jen.
It was a...
Ah, shit. All right. Yeah? No, you can talk.
It was a tremendous learning experience. And one of the things I really enjoyed was having the opportunity to meet so many people that are trying to do the right things for the right reasons. And I enjoyed that very much. I learned a lot about the political system and... I signed up to be a Democrat when I was in college, when Ann Richards was campaigning for governor. And that's what I would call a historical Texas Democrat. Business is running here. That's a good sign.
Business is running. It is a good
Pardon us.
We were talking about if this changed your opinion on Austin politics, because the first time I ran for mayor, Dr. Jen, man, I definitely started to see the city in a much different light.
What'd you think? Oh, you got to tell me.
Man, I just realized how full of shit a lot of these people were and how controlled everything is by the real estate and development industry. You know what I mean? And just how they manipulate. They do a really good job of manipulating people through advertisement, and they do a very good job of using identity politics and social justice to fulfill developer-friendly initiatives. That's what I noticed. But you know what? It actually made me work harder and made me get a lot more motivated to make money because I saw how the city was headed. I mean...
That's good. Yeah, I saw there was definitely identity. And I think that's maybe one of the things that's difficult right now is everybody wants to identify and have that sense of belonging and where do I belong. Even if the opinions are somewhere in the middle, it's like you're pulled to one extreme or the other extreme. And that to me was probably the downside. And the part I didn't like was trying to be pulled to an extreme that I don't believe in. I tend to be very conservative financially.
Me too. Yeah.
Very conservative fiscally. I obviously want things that are pro-business because I like the idea that, somebody can create a business like this one that employs people and gives them an opportunity, and they don't need a bunch of certificates and check marks and high expensive education to make a good, honest living that's fulfilling.
No, and I fully agree with you. And I'm glad you brought that up. And just before we even got onto the podcast, we were talking about the presidential election for a bit. We're not going to go into I don't really want to go into the presidency too much because it's not relevant to what we're talking.
We got to see what happens.
Yeah, we got to see what happens. But we both said that the best. We both agreed that the best form of government is an inefficient government that does nothing.
Well, let me temper that a bit because I believe that the role of government is to provide for us collectively what we can't do individually. If our nation were attacked, you're great at jiu-jitsu, but you're not going to fend off an entire army by yourself.
I'm not that great. I'm pretty mediocre, but
okay, you're mediocre at jiu-jitsu, but you're better at it than I am. But you're not going to fend it off by yourself, right? We need to come together to provide for the safety of our nation. We need to come together to provide for good roadways and things like that we need.
But the ideal
and infrastructure,
like from a business standpoint, the best situation for business is for a Biden presidency and a Republican Senate is a really good situation for business, and vice versa. A Trump presidency,
as long as they'll get along and work together.
Well, they won't. But and a Trump presidency and a Democratic majority in Congress is also really good. So either way, I'm fine with that as long as you don't have a supermajority in government. Is how I look at it. And both of us are kind of like in agreement.
Sometimes feel that way.
Yeah. But let's talk about your council race and how you feel about Jimmy Flanagan. What's your
I feel like at this point I didn't make the runoff. We did a great job.
What percent of the vote did you get?
We ended up with 20%.
You got 20% of the vote.
So we didn't come in the race. I didn't enter in the race until really almost the filing deadline.
Same here. Yeah. I got 5% having dropped out.
Which is awesome. And I think there was a dropout in District 10 that got about 1% also, which was great.
Yeah.
No, I was very pleased with that. The tactical maneuvers of campaigning, that was such a learning experience on how that's done and how things need to be timed to reach voters. And then how do you do it during a pandemic? So tricky. So it was very hard to not have that name recognition and that voter recognition going into early voting where people were so impassioned.
But considering that's pretty phenomenal. That you actually that's pretty extraordinary.
Yay, team!
Way
to go, team! I love my team.
I think it's great. I also, I also I've criticized Jimmy Flanagan. I've criticized our city a lot, on a multitude of ways because I felt like what they were doing was literally hurting my ability to make a living had they fully gotten their way. And as somebody who does this job for a living, I'm within my rights to be vocal and critical. And I feel like I've been
as
critical.
A citizen,
I feel like
I've been,
even though I've been pretty adamant about this recall petition, I feel like I've been doing it respectfully, and I'm doing it from a standpoint of, hey, I want to make a living. I feel like these policies are genuinely hurting me. I have a right to stand up for myself as a tax-paying citizen who contributes to the culture of the city.
So I have a question for you, given what you do for a living. If we're talking about expanding the convention center, and that would
help me. It would help me, but you can't do that right now because our music venues and our small businesses that make the city awesome are struggling, and nobody's going to want to go to conventions here if we don't have our culture.
Sure,
so for right now,
if we look at the business cycle on that,
I'm just saying you got to put that on hold.
Devil's advocate.
I think in 2018 in 2019, I would have not. It would have been a non-issue for me. I would have been like, hey man, this is going to be fine. This is going to help me. But now.
For how long? How long do we need to put it on hold?
We got to keep these music. We got to make sure these music venues and our classic Austin institutions are able to still be solvent. And then once that's the case, then you reassess.
So if we could get the vaccine going in January, begin to vaccinate, and let's suppose we can get vaccinations to at-risk communities by March. Could we hold South by Southwest?
Well, we should hold South by Southwest in general, and we're still holding it. They're still agreeing to hold it for about 5 days right now. I think we should definitely hold South by, and I think that you're going to get a better testing program too. I think that if you can pick up a test at like Walgreens or Walmart whenever you want, and it's rapid and it gives you results right away, the spread and the impact of this virus will be slowed tremendously. Because if you're positive, you just know you have it, and then you can stay home for 2 weeks, and then you're good to go, right? So it's just
you don't think they're going to give the kid a Tylenol and send him to school anyway?
I think that there should be some legal problem. If you do something like that, there should be some serious legal problems if you're knowingly telling people to go to school with COVID. Just like they were telling people to go vote while they have COVID. The CDC was telling people to do that. That's so irresponsible. But I don't know. My thing that like bothers me about Jimmy is that like you got the most developer-friendly candidate in the entire city of Austin, right? And your field manager is a communist. Like, it does not, it goes completely against what your policies are, and I think it's extremely disingenuous. And I don't have a problem with either of them. Like, I've hung out with Jimmy Flanagan. I think he's a pretty cool person, like, when he's not in office. Like, I just don't think he's very, I don't think he's
so what about
very good at his job
and his potentials for
field man. I don't think he's, I don't know. And I've hung out with his field manager, too. Like, I like them both as people. They're both cool people. I don't disagree. I don't, like, dislike them. I just think that them working together is it kind of seems like a red flag. That's all. It seems like a red flag considering that their ideologies are so polarized and so different. That's my take on it.
Well, for me, for the run, it really wasn't a run or a referendum on COVID, and I didn't like being framed that way. I really wanted to frame the discussion about the role of the District 6 representative to the District 6 voters. We're a 10-1 system, and it's supposed that if it works the way it's supposed to, then each district representative brings in their constituent voices to downtown when important decisions are being made and advocates for their constituents. Now, it needs to be done in a way that's respectful to the whole city.
Of course.
But that I ran because at that time, and Jimmy knows this, we've talked, I felt like it had moved to where we weren't getting the representation that we needed, and that what we thought needed to happen with the homelessness concerns and the law enforcement concerns was not really representing the overwhelming majority of views. Now, we'll see what happens in the runoff, December 15th.
So speaking of which, in the runoff, who you got? Who are you endorsing, Dr. Jen?
I'm watching both of them. I like them both. They're obviously coming from different perspectives,
sure.
And I don't want to bias the voters. I'm still kind of digesting my own experience and how it was for me, and like you said, what was it like to be in the belly of the Democratic Party, and does that fit when I'm more find myself feeling, at least in this setting, a little bit more conservative. How do you wrap your own ideology? So it's a very interesting, introspective time. I want to hear from the candidates what they're doing. I think I've interacted with them both in forums, and the voters need to decide that.
Sure. I mean, look, I'm going with Mackenzie. Mackenzie's my friend, and I have nothing personally against Jimmy. Like, I like him as a human being. I've been very clear about that. I think he's not very good at his job, but as a human being, like, I like him. And when I talk to him, he's pretty receptive to talking to me, right? Like, I don't think he's like a bad guy. You know what I mean? But
I am concerned because if we say, okay, well, we put Jimmy in for the term he's finishing out, and the policies went a certain way. I mean, in our district, the voters, well, I guess it went citywide. In 2012, they bonded to fund a Northwest substation. And so that's slowly been progressing. I would still like to see that happen. And so my big question to Jimmy is if you're embracing the idea of having a law enforcement that's providing good, equitable justice, that does what we want it to do, does that come together with still getting a Northwest substation so that we can have the police service we need to District 6?
Yeah, sure. No, I get that.
That's one of my questions I'd like to hear the answer to, so we'll throw it out there for him and let him answer it.
I also think that another reason why I want Mackenzie to get the W is because I think we need, like, some dissenting voices in the council.
It's healthy.
It's not healthy, like, how this, like how it's such a liberal echo chamber. It is not healthy because it's your decision making changes when you're not around people who have differing opinions. You know what I mean? Like, just even though, like, Mackenzie being on the council is not going to really change something from a voter standpoint because she's a very distinct minority. her voice is still going to be heard, and there could be influence in terms of how certain decisions are made. So that's why I think it would be really important to have somebody like
that perspective. That's
you
important.
need that perspective. You need like somebody who's you need a conservative voice on the city council. And look, there are things I disagree with Mackenzie Kelly, but she's accessible. Like whenever I call her, she calls me back.
Yeah.
She communicates with me. She's
very
super
nice.
nice. She's extremely
Very
nice. She's an
nice.
extremely nice person. She genuinely wants to do the right thing. And I think that, I don't like what the Flanagan campaign is doing by like trying to call her like a super right-wing fascist and trying to like compare her to Don Zimmerman and do all that stuff. I think that's dishonest and disingenuous. And,
Don Zimmerman is not running for city council.
Yeah, that's
Mackenzie
wrong.
Kelly
I think that's wrong what they're doing.
Yeah, I do too. But I'm hoping that as we move through this next phase, and that's why I keep pushing back, and that's why I'm answering the way I'm answering, is so that we can talk about the issues affecting District 6. I want to see that. And I think then when we talk about the issues affecting District 6, then we will know this feels like the right candidate.
You're still undecided. You're still undecided.
I want to hear about the issues.
You want to hear about the issues? You're still undecided. And
I
appreciate
like both people as humans. I want to hear about the issues. And I tend to feel that in the last several years, District 6 has not been served the way it needs to be served.
Sure. Respect. One last thing before we go. You were supposed to go to this Back the Blue rally. Word on the street, Jen, is that you were supposed to go to this Back the Blue rally, and you didn't.
I needed to call you. I needed a ride. I know. So I had spoken to Lewis to go, and said, "Can I hitch a ride?" I was going to ride with him. I thought that'd be great fun, and we missed each other. And I didn't, so then I was like, okay, do I just show up? I wasn't sure what I'd do. And it really was, it kind of fell flat. And that was a bummer. The numbers were starting to come up on COVID. I was getting some work pressure about that.
What kind of pressure?
Well, I'm in a very small group, so I have to be very careful about my exposures, because if I get exposed and I'm out, then it damaged.
So you were worried about. So you didn't want to go because you're worried about getting COVID?
There was concern. Yeah, there was concern about rally and a lot of folks being out there and what that might look like. There was some concern about that happening.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, as a medical person, I can't risk that.
But you agreed to go to it.
But I didn't get called back about my ride either.
Okay, that's fine. But did you communicate that publicly?
No, I didn't know that was a public communication. I had only spoken with the organizer, so I hadn't spoken with anybody else about it.
Because I'm buds with Teddy Roosevelt, Twitter personality.
I don't know who that is.
His identity will remain a secret.
Okay.
He was on my podcast. He had a Spider-Man mask deliberately to keep his identity secret. To also be safe and slow the spread of this virus, Dr. Jen. But He was visibly upset and disappointed with the fact that you didn't show up to this rally that you said you were going to show up for. So I just wanted to know what your reasoning behind it is. And, look, retrospectively, considering some of the people that were in that picture, maybe it was not the worst decision that you made. And me and Mackenzie are going to have to talk about this.
I don't think she had any part of that.
She had no part. She had no part.
I don't think
let's
our
go.
law enforcement officers had any part of that either.
Good. I'm glad. All right.
And so I agree with you. There are certain things that happen in politics and media that get spun in a way that is not healthy. That is not healthy. That is not healthy for our city. That is not healthy for our officers. Those people had a right to be there. That's their constitutional right. That does not necessarily say that it represents any of the views of people who were there trying to say there's another side of the story. We do support law enforcement, and we want them to be with us. Yeah,
and I think that what the city does, which I really have a huge problem with, is that anybody who's like vocally disagreeing with their agenda, anytime a movement like that gains any kind of traction, they will just call it Trumpy automatically, or call you the R word, or say you're xenophobic, or say that you're a bigot, and do that stuff in an unsubstantiated way. And that's really divisive, and it's polarizing. It's something I really don't like, and I feel like somebody like Jimmy Flanagan is perpetuating that, and it's dangerous. It's not healthy, and that's why maybe it's better for someone like Mackenzie to be in office, because it'll be a different message.
Cheers to that.
All right. Well, anyway, Dr. Jen, Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this. I know you got a busy schedule. She's in jogging clothes. She's fresh off a run because exercise is literally how you boost your immune system to combat the effects of a deadly virus. We're taking all precautions. We need practical voices involved with the city, and I hope that you stay involved from a health standpoint and you make your voice heard on whatever commissions that you can be involved with. I hope your voice doesn't go away because of this.
No,
because we need honest, we need practical, and we need realistic advice to have a balance between public health and keeping our economy open and keeping our culture open. And you need to be that.
The cure can't be worse than the disease.
The cure cannot be worse than the disease. But anyway, Dr. Jen, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
All right, all new episode, Convos on the Pedicab. Tune in.